A very good afternoon to our speakers, distinguished guests, and everyone who has joined us today. Welcome to the launch of HDB's Designing for Life roadmap. My name is Violet and I'll be your MC for today. We will be opening today's program with a welcome address by HDB CEO Dr. Cheong Koon Hian, followed by a speech by Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat. We will then be joined by a distinguished panel comprising Dr. Cheong, Professor Lily Kong, Professor John Wong, Professor David Chan, and Mr. Volker Buscher, who will be sharing on how good planning, smart technologies, and an engaged community can help HDB design for life. Our panel will also be taking your questions at the end of the panel discussion. Without further ado, may we invite Dr. Cheong to deliver her welcome address.
Good afternoon. This year, HDB turns 60. Over the past 6 decades, Singapore's public housing landscape has undergone tremendous transformation. When HDB first started out in the 1960s, we focused on providing basic, no-frills flats that could be built quickly, easily, and at low cost to address the severe housing shortage in Singapore. As the needs and aspirations of Singaporeans changed over the decades, our focus has also evolved. Today, a HDB home is much more than just a physical shelter. Beyond the 4 walls of the flat, it is also about creating a total living environment so that our HDB towns remain good homes to live in. As the master planner and developer for HDB towns, we continually seek to improve the way we plan our towns and design our flats to create better homes for Singaporeans. In the past decade, HDB had embarked on a massive building program to meet the demand for public housing after Singapore's swift recovery from the 2008 global financial crisis. We saw it as a golden opportunity to do something different, to build a new generation of homes and towns that not only caters to changing aspirations, but is also sustainable and brings the community closer together. To achieve our goals, we developed a roadmap to better living in HDB towns in 2011. This roadmap has guided us in developing a new generation of public housing to create a better, more delightful living environment. From 2010 to 2019, we launched about 220,000 flats. That's about 5 Toa Payoh towns in 10 years. Many of these homes have been progressively completed in recent years, including in new housing areas such as Bidadari, Tampines North, and Punggol North Shore. We have infused character and identity into each of these projects and introduced new housing typologies and flat layouts with a wider range of unit types to meet changing lifestyle needs. We have also intensified our greening efforts and incorporated nature into our projects in a holistic manner. In 2018, we took this one step further when we developed a biophilic town framework to create nature-centric neighbourhoods that promote residents' sense of place, health, and well-being. Beyond the physical landscape, we have also taken a more community-centric approach in our planning and design. For example, a myriad of landscape spaces is provided in every housing development to offer more opportunities for recreation and community bonding. We have reimagined and expanded the shared spaces in HDB projects. Our residents can now enjoy social spaces like skyrise gardens and community living rooms. Our new generation neighbourhood centres also integrate many amenities under one roof. In addition to shops, community facilities, active ageing hubs and childcare centres, these are all weaved together in different combinations. These are further complemented by sheltered community plazas, playgrounds, and fitness corners that encourage more social activities and interactions that help to increase vibrancy in the neighbourhood. With more than 1 million flats in 10,000 HDB blocks island-wide, HDB plays a key role in driving sustainable development in Singapore. So since 2011, we have introduced a wide range of sustainability features in HDB estates, spanning urban greenery, building technology, as well as energy, waste, and water management. One of our focal areas is powering up HDB estates through solar energy. By 2030, when HDB turns 70, we can expect to see 70% of all HDB blocks fitted with or identified for solar installation. Our smart journey started as early as 2014, when we formulated our Smart Town framework to tap on smart solutions to improve the way we plan, develop, and manage our towns and estates. One example is the adoption of environmental modeling to simulate the effects of the sun, wind, and noise to help us create cooler and more eco-friendly homes. Over the past decade, we have ushered in a new generation of public housing with significant shifts towards well-designed, sustainable, community-centric towns that harness both the power of nature and smart technologies. Nevertheless, providing the best possible homes for Singaporeans is an ongoing, iterative process. As HDB enters its 7th decade, we recognize that there are more challenges ahead, but we remain steadfast in our mission and will continue to innovate and implement fresh and bold ideas for the future of HDB living. On this note, it is my pleasure to invite Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat to share with us his thoughts on the future directions for public housing in Singapore.
Very good afternoon. I'm happy to launch HDB's refreshed roadmap for the coming decade, Designing for Life. The Designing for Life roadmap is timely, as COVID-19 has made us see our home in a new light. For many, home has become a sanctuary from the pandemic. For some, home is increasingly a space for work. For all, home is where we bond with our loved ones. Our housing situation today has come a long way from the crowded squatter settlements of early Singapore. 60 years ago, HDB was set up to resolve a housing crisis. In 1964, the Home Ownership for the People scheme was introduced for Singaporeans to own their homes. HDB has since built over 1 million flats and transformed our heartlands into modern and vibrant towns. Today, 8 in 10 Singaporeans live in HDB flats, with 90% of them owning the home they live in. We'll continue to keep HDB flats accessible and affordable for all. But we'll also continue to upgrade and rejuvenate our estates so that they remain vibrant and livable. I'm standing before you at Dawson Estate. Dawson Estate has a rich history. It was developed in the 1950s by the Singapore Improvement Trust, HDB's predecessor. In 2007, Dawson underwent a major facelift. It is now a much more vibrant estate with striking architecture. Set within the lush greenery, the estate has many features such as green terraces and roof gardens. It's like living in a park. The thoughtful heritage storyboards along Alexandra Linear Canal Park help residents appreciate the heritage of Dawson. Newer housing projects in Dawson Estate have gained international recognition for innovation in housing design. And many of the new HDB developments in the last decade have also won accolades. This is a story of Singapore, celebrating our past, rejuvenating the present, and building for the future. The task of building Singapore never ends. As Singaporeans' lifestyles and aspirations evolve, we must continue to provide a home and quality living environments for Singaporeans at every stage of their lives. HDB has a vision to further improve the living environments for Singaporeans. HDB has developed a new blueprint called the Designing for Life Roadmap. Why Designing for Life? HDB is committed to designing and building flats that meet your needs at each stage of your life, and to provide you with a home for life. Going beyond the four walls of your flat, this roadmap has 3 pillars: live well, live smart, live connected. Let me start with living well. HDB will be taking a people-centric approach to anticipate the physical, social, and mental well-being needs of our residents. HDB seeks to build healthy towns for all ages. You can look forward to more opportunities to lead healthy lifestyles, stay active, and build community bonds. With an aging population, HDB will be creating a safer and more inclusive living environment for our seniors in new developments and through upgrading of existing HDB spaces, such as our East program. For residents of all ages, more facilities will be available to help maintain a healthy, active lifestyle. New neighbourhood centres will be conceptualised as social and wellness hubs. These hubs will feature community spaces, green pockets, healthy food options, and more health and wellness shops. Let me now turn to living smart. As Singapore moves towards our vision of a smart nation, HDB will, over the next few years, make this real for you. Imagine sensor-enabled estate lighting that responds to weather conditions, brightening when lighting conditions are poor. Cooling fans that automatically adjust the speed in response to temperature and human traffic. Intelligent homes where residents can monitor energy consumption patterns with their smartphone. And smart parking that doesn't require gantries or coupons. By living smart, we can also live sustainably and protect our environment. Over time, HDB will introduce greener sources of energy like solar panels and add more greenery in your estates, such as community gardens. The use of sensors and data for preemptive maintenance will reduce energy consumption and further cool your homes by using external wall paint that reduces heat absorption. The first of these smart and sustainable precincts in Punggol North Shore District will be completed later this year. HDB will also be introducing some of these smart features in selected BTO projects in Tengah and other parts of Punggol. The third pillar of the roadmap is to live connected. Beyond building houses and towns, HDB aims to build homes and communities where people bond with one another, live together, and grow together. Integrated developments such as Kampong Admiralty in Woodlands and Oasis Terraces in Punggol bring added convenience to seniors with facilities such as polyclinics and active aging hubs. Common spaces are also designed to promote intergenerational bonding, such as through co-locating of childcare and senior care centres at Kampong Admiralty. These projects were developed in collaboration with multiple stakeholders and partner agencies, and HDB will continue to improve how our integrated developments are designed and operated. More such integrated developments are in the pipeline. Come next year, the new Bedok South Horizon will be integrated with the Siglap Community Centre and care facilities for seniors. Park residences at Tengah, a new BTO development, within Tengah Park district will also be integrated with a neighbourhood centre and polyclinic. You also have social and wellness hub to encourage community bonding and active living. Residents can also look forward to playing a bigger role in shaping their living environment. Common spaces will be safeguarded within the towns for the community to come together and create their preferred social spaces and facilities. HDB will also be piloting this initiative at new housing developments, including Sky Residences at Dawson and Tampines Green Verge. In the coming months, HDB will also be inviting you to participate in efforts to rejuvenate Bukit Merah, Queenstown, Choa Chu Kang, and Ang Mo Kio under the Remaking Our Heartlands program. Live well, live smart, and live connected. These are the three pillars of HDB's refreshed roadmap for the future. I encourage you to visit the Designing for Life online exhibition to find out more. I've highlighted HDB's plans. HDB would like to hear from you and work with you to turn this roadmap into reality. In the spirit of Singapore Together, each of us can do our part to make our estates better and to build a brighter future for Singaporeans. Over the decades, Singapore grew rapidly from mudflat to metropolis. The transformation of Dawson shows how far we have come as a nation. Our mission to rejuvenate our towns and our estates will never end. As we start a new decade, the newly launched Designing for Life blueprint will enable HDB to better meet your needs at each stage of your life throughout life. I invite all of you to join us on this journey to live better, smarter, and be more connected. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat, for launching HDB's Designing for Life roadmap. Next, I would like to invite everyone to sit back and enjoy a glimpse of the future of HDB living through this video.
What will our future homes be like?
This is our home. I love to take morning walks with my granddaughter around our neighborhood. There are plenty of places to explore and people to meet. Sometimes we feel motivated to move quickly. Other times we prefer to take it slow and enjoy the journey. We can share our experiences and also learn new ways of doing things together. Life is better when we live well in a safe and comfortable home.
This is our home. Infrastructure and technology combine seamlessly for greater convenience. We can do lots with a simple tap or swipe. Feel close to loved ones even if we live apart. It's great that our home can adapt to our needs. Life is easier when we live smart in a well-designed and sustainable home.
This is our home. My neighbors are my friends. It's easy to find people who share the same interests. So online friends can become offline buddies. Life is better when we live connected and come together to create a better home. This is our home. This is the future of HDB living. At HDB, we don't just design the four walls of your home, but a world beyond.
Our panel of distinguished speakers will now be sharing their thoughts on how HDB can address some key trends and challenges, and how good planning, smart technologies, and an engaged community can help HDB design for life. Our moderator for today's panel discussion is Professor Lily Kong. She is the 5th president of the Singapore Management University and the first Singaporean to lead the 20-year-old institution. Our first panel member is HDB CEO Dr. Cheong Koon Hian. She oversees 1.2 million public housing flats in 27 towns and estates. Our next panel member is Professor John Yuli Wong, Isabel Chan Professor in Medical Sciences and Senior Vice President in Health Innovation and Translation at the National University of Singapore. Our third panel member is Professor David Chan. He is the Director of the Behavioral Sciences Institute at the Singapore Management University. Last but not least, we have with us Mr. Volker Buscher, Arab's Chief Data Officer, responsible for the firm's strategy, creativity with data at scale. Our panel members will also be taking questions from our Zoom participants at the end of the panel discussion. For Zoom participants, please type in your questions into the Q&A box of your Zoom control panel anytime. I will now hand over the time to Professor Lily Kong to commence the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Violet, and a very good afternoon to everyone. I'm delighted and honored to be able to moderate this session with very distinguished and experienced speakers, and I'm looking forward to hearing from them, as I'm sure you are. This is a significant year for HDB. It is the 60th anniversary of the statutory board that has literally shaped and built our homes over the decades. As Singapore's public housing authority, HDB has made huge strides in creating well-designed, sustainable homes since it was established 60 years ago. With new trends such as an aging population, climate change, technological disruption, a more diverse society, and changing aspirations, as well as the need for greater public engagement, what will the future of public housing look like? DPM Heng has just launched HDB's Designing for Life roadmap that outlines HDB's priorities for the next decade. We're honored to have several expert panelists today to comment on future HDB living and how HDB can achieve its aspirations in developing healthy and highly livable towns. You have already been introduced to the very distinguished panel earlier, Dr. Cheong, Prof. Wong, Prof. Chan, and Mr. Buscher, so I will not say any more about their very admirable achievements and deep experience. We are here to listen to them, so let us do just that. I will begin by posing a question or two to each of them to invite their thoughts on different dimensions of public housing. I will then open the floor to the audience and invite your questions. You're welcome to type in your questions anytime during their remarks as well as after their remarks, and I will pick up a few to pose to the speakers in the remaining half hour or so. So let us begin. No better person to start this dialogue session off than with Dr. Cheong, who has been CEO of HDB since 2010. And so for Kun Hien, whom I've known for a while now and an admirer of her work, I'd just say that DPM Heng has outlined HDB's aspirations in the development of its towns for the next decade. I'd like very much to invite you to expand on some of these ideas and say why the new focus is important and how residents will benefit from these new thrusts. So over to you, Kun Hien.
Hi, Lily. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to speak to you again, and thank you for the opportunity to expand on what DPM has said. Well, as I've said, HDB turns 60 this year, and we have housed the nation over 60 years, improving the quality of our public housing with each decade. In the last decade, HDB has been guided by our roadmap to better living since 2011 to develop a new generation of well-designed and community-centric towns that are sustainable and smart. Well, in 2011, we focused on making our towns more sustainable. Then in 2014, we started to introduce smart technologies in line with Singapore's Smart Nation goals. And in 2018, we introduced the biophilic concept in the greening of our towns. Many towns like Punggol Eco Town have benefited from these initiatives, and we are progressively scaling them up in other towns. For the coming decade, HDB is proposing to place holistic well-being at the center of its refreshed roadmap. We intend to plan and design homes that can contribute to physical health, social connections, and positive behaviors. This focus is particularly more relevant with COVID-19, as countries start to realize the importance of developing with health and wellness in mind. So we are presenting a refreshed roadmap called Designing for Life that will be anchored on the three pillars of live well, live smart, and live connected. This refreshed roadmap will set out the new key focus areas in the planning, design, and programming of HDB towns so as to provide our residents with an ever-improving quality living environment. Well, live well. It will place focus on the health and overall well-being of our residents, both young and old. And these listed here are some of the initiatives that we will be adopting. Let me just expand on some of these. To create healthy towns for all ages, we will take a holistic approach to enhance the three dimensions of our residents' well-being: physical, social, and mental dimensions. We will anticipate as best as we can and plan for the needs of our residents across the different life cycle stages. Our initiatives will be supported by science, where we strive to synthesize medical and built environment knowledge to develop solutions that can bring about positive well-being outcomes. The first initiative is to enhance the design of facilities to be more fun and engaging to facilitate active lifestyles. For instance, we can design very attractive staircases complemented by motivational message, and we hope we can nudge you to simulate exercise in your everyday routines. In fact, the picture here shows Park Residence at Tengah, which was just launched in August. So I hope the residents there will really use the staircase for their exercises. Here's another example. This is what we would normally see on a roof garden. We can introduce more exercise stations and explore weaving in self-help assessment tools to motivate people to move more and to exercise. Another focus area is to foster a safe and inclusive environment. In the outdoor environment, we can improve orientation and facilitate the ease of navigation, especially for an aging population with declining visual ability. We have started to incorporate pictorial symbols and larger font sizes in signage, for example. And in future, we will look into incorporating more dementia-friendly design features, such as simple loop paths in parks, to help people with dementia to navigate easily and to enjoy the park. For indoors, research has shown that with old age, there is also a decline in color perception. So, for example, we will be offering colored grab bars to provide greater visual contrast and to improve indoor safety in our East program. We will continue to provide a range of conducive community spaces for residents to mingle and to bond with their neighbors. And we will provide spaces of different scales. For example, the town square can cater to many larger scale activities. Even smaller spaces are important for people to meet. For example, we designed a linkway as a social veranda at the Bidadari Alcove Court View, one of our HDB projects soon to be completed. Our new generation neighborhood centers will be conceptualized as one-stop social and wellness hubs. They can incorporate multiple elements like play parks for children, community spaces for bonding, green spaces for relaxation, and facilities for exercise. Shops can include health and wellness trades, and healthy food options can be served. And where feasible, they can be co-located with community and healthcare facilities like polyclinics and community clubs for social activities. Again, for example, in park residences in Tengah, one of our newly launched BTO projects. It has a new social and wellness hub that integrates a neighborhood center and polyclinic. Greenery also provides restoration and respite benefits to support mental well-being. So we will weave in more tranquil green spaces within the precinct so that people who need some quiet moments to reflect and relax can do so. And to satisfy and meet our mind's desire to learn, we can provide lots of learning opportunities through horticulture activities such as gardening and hobby farming. Communal farming and gardening also foster community ties and can enhance social connectedness. And we will share more information to help people understand the types of eco-design features in the towns that they live. And in turn, we hope to grow the number of our friends of our heartland, where our volunteers share their knowledge about eco-living and encourage residents to lead a green lifestyle. HDB will continue to holistically consider the 5 elements of the environment landscape, which is soil, water, flora and fauna, outdoor comfort and people. And we want to incorporate them into the neighborhood landscape from the outset so that our residents can enjoy nature's intrinsic benefits. These biophilic principles have been incorporated into our new projects launched since 2019. And we will be studying how to bring the biophilic concepts into our neighborhood renewal projects so as to benefit our existing estates and neighborhoods as well. And of course, it's about convenient access for all. So intra-town cycling networks are being planned and progressively implemented in many of the towns like Ang Mo Kio. AV trials will be piloted in Punggol and Tengah. And for new towns, we will have upcoming car-like precincts, which will be safer, more walkable, and pleasant for the community, for example, at Bayshore and Tengah. And in the coming years, existing towns will continue to be rejuvenated through multiple upgrading and redevelopment programs. And these are some of the upgrading programs that many of us are familiar with. Live Smart. It is about how we can deploy smart applications and technologies to improve the day-to-day living of our residents, to ensure more efficient use of resources, and to deliver reliable and convenient services. Punggol North Shore, our first smart and sustainable district, will have its first precincts completed by end of the year or early next year. A whole suite of smart and sustainable initiatives will help the estate to function more efficiently with reliable services. For example, sensors will issue alerts when maintenance is required, say for lifts. And within each home, there is smart enabled home infrastructure to help residents adopt smart applications, such as to monitor their synergy in using energy and water consumption, and to install compatible smart devices at home. Around the estate, smart car parks will offer greater convenience for drivers by optimizing car park spaces between long and short-term parking. Smart lighting and fans located at common areas will activate and adjust in response to human traffic patterns to provide a pleasant environment for residents while optimizing energy consumption. And many of the sustainable urban solutions have already been piloted in Punggol. We will be going beyond what have been done in Punggol in newer areas like Tengah Town, where we will introduce even more innovation, smart and sustainability types of solutions. And existing towns too will also be upgraded. We are going to introduce the 10-year Hdb Green Towns program to make all existing Hdb towns sustainable by 2030. We aim to reduce energy consumption by a further 15% from today's levels, reduce the usage of potable water at all common areas by more than 50%, and to lower ambient temperature by up to 2 degrees centigrade. Making places and memories together is what binds a community together. So Live Connected is about finding ways for people to connect with each other, to build stronger bonds, and to encourage them to actively shape their own neighborhoods. First, we will set aside white spaces, and these are common spaces that Hdb residents can collectively design and build their preferred shared spaces and facilities. We will pilot this next year in selected BTO precincts in Tampines and Dawson. Second, we will organize workshops and focus group discussions for the remaking of Heartlands program, which is a rejuvenation program for existing Hdb towns. And residents are encouraged to propose how they would like to shape their own town and neighborhoods. Third, we have already introduced the Lively Places program, where we will provide the funding, training, and platform to encourage the community to initiate ground-up projects, and we will further scale up this program. And finally, we would like to further nurture the kampong spirit in Hdb towns. To do so, we need to be able to better understand our residents and their preferences, which can then be used to inform planning and design of towns and estates. We are carrying out a new urban kampong research program that will comprise 4 enabling projects. First, to gain deeper insights into the new population segments within our Hdb towns, we need to understand and uncover emerging lifestyle trends and sentiments towards the community. Next, we want to look into understanding residents' new quality of life preferences. Thirdly, to identify drivers and motivators that will encourage residents to start ground-up initiatives and activities on their own. And finally, we want to harness socio-technical data to help us to refine plans and designs. So Singaporeans can look forward to Hdb homes and towns that will promote better health and well-being and enhance quality of life. So we really would like to invite you to view our Designing for Life online exhibition. Please do give us your feedback, share your views and ideas with us, and we really look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kun Hian. I am very delighted to hear the 3 pillars, and particularly that first one on Live Well, which focuses attention on holistic well-being. And so I'd like to turn attention to Prof. John Wong, who is very well placed to comment on living well. I'd just like to say that from something I've read based on the Burden of Disease in Singapore report that was published just last year, I understand that the average life expectancy of Singaporeans stands at almost 85 years, 84.8 to be precise. And this is a very significant improvement from 2 decades ago. While that sounded encouraging, there was something else that caught my eye, which is that healthy life expectancy is only 74.2 years. In other words, Singaporeans may live up to 10 years in ill health. So we tend to think about living well, and healthy lives in terms of, not having to go to the hospital, not having to go to see the doctor, etc. But I wonder if you could comment on how HDB's designs and provision of facilities can actually enable a healthier life and not just a longer lifespan, but a longer health span. Over to you, John.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Kong. If I can have my first slide, please. Yeah, so thank you very much for bringing up this whole concept of health span. And I think that this is an important concept because I think for the longest of times we've been focusing on lifespan, but we actually should draw attention to the concept of health span. And firstly, I'd like to congratulate Dr. Cheong and the whole of HDB for I think the HDB is one of Singapore's biggest successes. So in terms of designing for life and how to live well, I think it's important to reflect that when one looks at the factors influencing premature disability and premature death, only 10% of the factors are actually related to the quality of healthcare. 60% of the factors which influence premature disability and death are actually social, behavioral, and environmental. So how we live, learn, work and play significantly affects our health. Our homes can also enable new models of healthcare. Can I have the next slide? So I would like to share perhaps 4 areas which HDB can significantly influence the quality of our health. Firstly, by enabling healthy longevity. We know the importance of walking, and if walking can be safe and pleasant, as you saw in Dr. Cheong's slides and DPM Heng's speech. Again, safe and walking pleasant, very helpful. Having good air quality, improving the quality and duration of sleep. So making sure that we can try and reduce the ambient noise, especially at nighttime. Having access to healthy and affordable food choices. Enabling intergenerational interaction. There's strong data to show bidirectional benefits, that young adults find older adults calming, and older adults feel a stronger sense of purpose when mixing with younger adults or younger people. Very importantly, preventing social isolation. So how can we have proximity and safe access to areas of recreation and outdoor exercise, markets, supermarkets, libraries, places of worship, entertainment and culture, meaningful and purposeful work for as long as we can, and public transport. And finally, easy access to age-appropriate health screening. So this is the first point. Next slide. And then secondly, how can we reduce the risk of injury? Unfortunately, the home can be potentially a dangerous place, especially when one gets older. Reducing the risk of falls at home become a very important priority. In the United States, only 57% of homes have more than one accessibility feature. I think Dr. Cheong showed, the color enhanced grab bars, very important. But good lighting, removing steps, having height-appropriate electrical sockets, non-slip floors, and hallways and doors wide enough for wheelchairs, walkers, and walking canes also will reduce the risk of injury. And also reducing the risk of injury when one goes out, so we can have safe and easy access to all the destinations I outlined in the earlier slide. And we saw the better signage that HDB is putting in. So really kudos to HDB. Next slide. The third area is how can we enable aging in place by having adaptable housing? And what do I mean by adaptable housing? So how can we allow people to remain within their same home or within the same building complex for as long as possible? As their needs increase, perhaps with age, access to affordable, quality, assisted living facilities within the same building complex, ideally, and then even skilled nursing needs, again, as their needs increase with age. So rather than being moved to other geographic areas or housed in an unfamiliar environment with unfamiliar people. Data again from the United States has shown that access to an occupational therapist, wellness nurse, and a handyman for home modifications, allowing them to modify the home and reduce the activities of daily living, really showed that this the benefit from improving the activities of daily living reduced depression equivalent to that of medication. And actually, interestingly, amongst these three disciplines, the handyman was found to be the most useful of the three. And then this adaptable housing to allow you to stay in your own community gives this sense of connectiveness to the larger world. Next slide. And then finally, how can housing enable delivery of healthcare? We've certainly seen during COVID the surge in the use of telemedicine. And telemedicine includes telemonitoring, teleconsultation, as well as teleservices. How can we have easy access to affordable, comprehensive, quality primary care? Can this be on the ground floor or within, easily within 10 to 15 minutes walking distance? How about the availability of certain on-site services, such as a service coordinator, medication management, and a nurse? Because again, data has shown that this can lead to lower hospitalization rates and slow healthcare expenditure. And then a big push to see how we can deliver hospital level care for certain conditions in the comfort of our own home. Again, data from Australia has shown that this can increase patient satisfaction, reduce the use of antipsychotic drugs in patients with dementia, reduce urinary tract and bowel complications, reduce hospital readmissions, and significantly reduce 6-month mortality. So what I've outlined to you, is are 4 possible ways that design and the environment can impact health. But for all of this to work, we actually need to have a multi and interdisciplinary design level systems approach, because HDB cannot do it alone. And again, I'm delighted to be invited to be part of this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed very much, John. Those are very insightful comments, and there's much for us to think about. The second pillar is one that is close to my heart. It's reflected some of the research that I've done over the years, and I would like to turn to the pillar of live connected. Even as we heard about physical, social, mental well-being, there is much that HDB contributes towards that. And so I turn to my colleague at SMU, David. David, you're a psychologist or a behavioral scientist, and HDB has in fact come a long way, I think, in building connected communities from the early days of using the concept of the neighbourhood and precinct, sizing communities for human scale interactions, and even taking on some of the responsibilities for organizing community activities. What I'd like to ask your thoughts on are this: in the next phase of HDB's work, what else might it do to help communities live in still more connected ways to enhance well-being and the quality of life? Over to you, David.
Okay, thanks, Lily. First, a pleasure to be here, and hi to everybody. And I think I will try to approach the answer in the question in a succinct way, based on the research that I'm aware of and the kinds of work that I've done over the years with different agencies. Of course, as a whole of government approach, whether it's NParks, ministries, and Hdb and so on. I suppose the first point to begin is to ask ourselves what exactly is well-being and quality of life before we talk about its connection with connectedness. From the research, I think it's quite clear. The well-being and quality of life is really about our lived experiences. And because it consists of subjective experiences of the way that we go about living, working, learning, and playing, and so on. And these lived experiences actually in turn affect our well-being and affect our quality of life. So by living connected, as I look at the plan unveiled by DPM and also Dr. Cheong, I would say it is about the connectedness in our lived experiences. And this connectedness, we can think about it in terms of various dimensions, right? We can think about connected the physical space or the physical environment around us, but also connectedness to the social space or the social environment. That's the kind of people that you interact with, the people you connect with outside your home in the Hdb. And then there's also a psychological or a mental component, because as you connect, the question to ask ourselves is how does these physical and social interactions affect us psychologically in terms of our well-being and so on. So I think once we look at connectedness or living connected in terms of the lived experiences, connecting to physical, social, and psychological, then we begin to appreciate the connections between this connectedness and your well-being and quality of life. The question I think really posed to me is how do we then moving forward to continue to enhance well-being, quality of life, and this connectedness? I would say first I want to preface that I think that from all I know about Hdb, and many of us know quite a lot about Hdb, following through one of the most stellar stat boards that we have in the history of Singapore, I think it is pretty clear that the Hdb, even though in the early years where the science is not that advanced, the science is not clearly available to the policymakers as it is today, we are quite fortunate because through sheer will, through courage, through some luck, but definitely through lots of intelligent planning and design, I think we have come a long way to appreciating what we actually know today in science. One example is that I think Hdb has long recognized that well-being and quality of life are not just positive ends in itself, but they are also important means to achieve other positive ends. And I think nothing can be clearer than today when you look at the COVID-19, that if we have good well-being and good quality of life among our residents, then as we have more challenges and when we have more needs to navigate and to adapt to, I think the well-being and quality of life provide that resource, provide that resilience for us to kind of move on. I think that was recognized quite early in terms of hence the policymakers and the civil servants, designers' efforts in investing in these. Now, I think we can go on and on with some parts of this science, and I hope that during the question and discussion time, we can talk some of these. But maybe I should go straight to the question asked of me, and that is moving forward, what can we do to further enhance this connectedness? I like to think in terms of C's, when I discuss things and to give us a mnemonic. So let's talk about 5 C's or 5 principles that I think are very important if we want to enhance connectedness. Some of these are already being done over the years and continue to be done. Perhaps some of these are a little bit more newer, and then we can focus more attention on it. The first C, I would suggest that not only Hdb, but all of us think through, right? As we adopt a whole of government approach or a whole of society approach, whichever stakeholders we are, the first C to remember, I think, is convenience. I think when we get outside our Hdb flat, the first thing you note in terms of the planner's terminology, as Lily has pointed out, is your precinct, right? The few hundred blocks of a few hundred residence units that you are exposed to. And that is important because in terms of a hierarchy of levels, that is your first encounter. As you open your door, walk onto the streets, what are the amenities you have? Now, we must have the convenience to be able to immediately walk to those things that we need in terms of shops, medical, or if you're a family, your playground, you want to have the children to go down, take a rest, and then come up again, and so on. So at the level of precinct, the convenience is very important. Of course, you can go larger to a few thousand residential units and talk about the neighborhood. And then we know that your town is actually consists of several neighborhoods revolving around your town center, right, where there are large commercial activities, where you can go to larger restaurants and so on. So convenience, I guess, will continue to be one of the main principles to ensure that we can get to the amenities that we want and all. The only thing I would add is that moving forward, we have to be a little bit more careful because I think what we traditionally understand to be convenient or inconvenient over decades may actually change quite abruptly as years to come. Let me give you an example. Most of us would think that playground, medical, groceries are the most important. Okay, maybe clothing as well. But as we digitize, perhaps shops with digital services, perhaps branches of telcos, those have become very important things that operate at the convenience level that you can no longer just talk about the neighborhood, but bring it down to the precinct level. So I would suggest that as we move forward, think about it in a very dynamic way that what is convenient to different segments of the population or the same segment could change over time. And then so the first C is convenience. The second C that I would suggest that we focus on is really about connectivity. And here I must say that our stats boards have done so well in terms of the whole of government approach. You look at the park connectors that both HDB and NParks have worked together. You look at together also with LTA, you look at the cycling paths and you look at the various ways that they are connected. So your neighborhoods and your precincts that they are nested within your neighborhood within your towns, but even across towns, they are very well connected as you look at the plans in the last 10 years especially. So I think connectivity will always remain important. What I would suggest moving forward is to understand connectivity in a very holistic manner, right? Because connectivity, you have to talk about walkability, you have to talk about taking a train, taking a bus, cycling, and what about PMDs, right? Your personal mobility devices. It also means we probably have to foresee some of the changes in laws, some of the changes in preferences. What happens if we suddenly have larger PMD vehicles that are very in vogue, that everybody wants to use, and we have no choice but to use them as well. So as we build our roads, our pathways, to talk about connectivity, we will probably have to anticipate some of these changes and be prepared for it so that we won't be caught off guard, right? And make sure that all our simple things, that our ways are not, our pathways are not too narrow, so that when changes appear, we don't have to play a catch up. Very quickly, I think the third C that I would suggest we look at, so you have convenience, you have connectivity, and the third C we'll look at obviously is community, right? And Kun Hien has talked a lot about the community. I think it's very important. By the way, to begin with, there are lots of what we call white spaces, right? White spaces means actually the designer actually put a space there in expensive land Singapore without actually have a preconceived notion of what you want to use the space for. And this is actually quite dramatic, you know, if you think about it, for a small country like Singapore where land is so scarce. You know, you could build a very large condo and earn a lot of money from it, but no, we are going to set aside white spaces. Why? Because we believe in co-creation. You believe that residents also are going to make use of the space and talk about truly co-create and think outside the box and say, what can we use for these spaces? So the idea of community, therefore, is very, very important as we bring people together, because when you bring people together, you develop the social capital, the interactions. And I would just add that you need both types of interaction. You need those that are sort of planned interactions, right? But you also need naturalistic interactions. So white spaces, connectivity together will provide you the physical environment where interactions can be organic. And when we know from research that as interactions evolve naturalistically, you actually build very lasting bonds. And I think that's very important. So community focus, community-centric is something that HDB has always been doing. It's a matter of moving forward. How do you tie that in with things like white spaces and other ways in order to build the social capital, the social networks, the interactions that are more naturalistic, and so that it runs parallel together with other organized activities by, say, the residential committees and so on. And just two more, and we're done with our C's, right? The fourth C is collaboration. And I think policymakers like to use the word co-creation. I would say co-creation is important, but it's a subset of collaboration, right? Because when we think about collaboration, agencies have to work together. You have to work with various designers, the stakeholders, and so on. So the ability to collaborate, of course, need to learn to look at things from other people's perspective. I think that is probably the most fundamental psychological or behavioral attitude that we need to adopt, because the whole is always more than the sum of its parts. And collaboration requires us to have the humility to agree and understand that we don't have all the answers. And then you can talk about genuine co-creation. And we'll end finally with the last C that I will say, contributions. I think that is implicit contributions implicit in planning, but maybe have not been given much more attention that I think it deserves. Because contributions really mean we ask ourselves as a residents, what can I do to make a positive difference to the people around me and to my neighborhood and to my town and therefore my country. The contributions is so important because as we interact, as we contribute, the research tells us that the giver, not just the benefactor, the person who benefit, the beneficiary, but the giver actually will increase your quality of life and well-being. You begin to be grateful, you begin to have the positivity that comes naturally. So I would just end by saying that the 5C principles are there. They are important. Your convenience, in terms of your connectivity, in terms of your community, your collaboration, and also finally your contributions. And the way I think we can put this thing together, and I'll end with that remark, the way we can gel them together is, if I may, propose or say a little bit about a concept that I have first discussed more than 10 years ago. And over time, in the 10 years of any talks I give, I try to instill it in my friends and colleagues and policymakers, that why can't we, or what, not why can't we, but why don't we use a unifying concept across all these principles? And the unifying concept I would suggest for HDB and for the country is the concept of what I have called home in community. Very simply and very quickly, we all have homes, right? We stay in our home, and really the HDB mission is to build endearing homes. And we know that Singapore, we are in many ways a global city, but we are very unique. We are also a city and a country. So you want to be a cohesive country, a cohesive community, at the same time being a cosmopolitan city. And if we can use the notion of home within a community and begin to build a sense of familiarity, a sense of belonging, a sense of identity, and then that can guide our design principles, right? In terms of having distinct clusters of identity, in terms of people contributing, in terms of people feeling committed, building social capital, and so on. So the home in community concept is nothing complicated, right? It is simply, can we build the place, this community, like my home, where I begin to feel a sense of familiarity, a sense of belonging, and a sense of identity. Because if I feel this, then I can talk about building positivity, building connectedness, building social capital and psychological capital. I guess I should stop here so that I don't exceed the 10 minutes or so that I have, and we can always discuss a little bit more if we have time, Lily, if that is okay with you.
Thank you very much, David, for bringing these very important issues of how we connect with one another, and in a sense, a little bit more of the touchy-feely aspect, but no less important than any of the other pillars. I'd like to turn to the third pillar on living smart. And of course, this is something that is seizing many cities. I'd like to turn, therefore, to Volker. And you are the Chief Data Officer at Arab. And so there's no better person to pose a question about smart technologies, too. The last few months have seen a lot more of us spending the vast majority of our time in our homes, thanks to COVID. What digital innovations do you think will be needed to help cities cope? And in particular, how can HDB develop smart strategies moving ahead? And how might these strategies be different from pre-COVID smart strategies? Over to you, Volker.
Thank you for Professor Kong. And thank you for inviting me to this session. It's always a pleasure and exciting to visit Singapore, even though this time it's virtual from sunny London, to hear what's happening in Singapore and to share some of the thoughts we have. My own journey has been interesting. I spent about 20 years in technology, delivering systems and the technologies we saw earlier in the different examples. And then about in 2017, we saw that all these systems were now creating a range of data that needed its own strategy and specific leadership and an approach. And that's why we created the approach around creativity with data at scale. And as part of that, I'm here to share some of the insights and some of the ideas and trends that we've seen specifically in cities and the use of data and technology. It is quite hard to imagine a future with less digital technologies in our daily lives, in the built environment, and how we manage our cities. Every day we're seeing more examples for emerging technologies such as the Internet of Things or artificial intelligence assisting in corporate decision making or providing our citizens with access to better services and new capabilities. What started really as a technical infrastructure to manage traffic lights or to control our energy systems or to have better access to the internet is now pervasive in all aspects of urban life. And while this is not yet a consistent trend in cities globally, Singapore, I believe, has laid the foundation to really move forward with the potential that comes from this abundance of data and access to state-of-the-art and emerging technologies in a very consistent and well-planned way. And as a result, we see the focus now on two strategies. One on the creative use of data, and the second on the deployment and development of technologies such as 5G or artificial intelligence or cloud computing. Now, it is important, though, to understand that these technology strategies are not a destination in their own right. Technology without purpose always had the risk of A, being expensive, and for cities to create a techno-dystopian future. And we've seen that in some cities around the world, which then had to sort of pull back from their technology deployment. So leaders now face a choice to give all the data and all the technology meaning and purpose. And while this is difficult to do, Singapore has probably one of the strongest foundations to start this work and to perhaps lead again globally in what good looks like in this area. That's why I love the theme, Designing for Life. That is really what places are about. And as a narrative, it is a very strong integrator, I think, for the themes we saw around technology and livability, behaviors that we heard from the previous speakers. So why is data and technology important? Why bother? I think there are four areas I'd like to explore. The first one is almost a given, and that is efficiency. Urban systems need to be efficient. Singapore knows that better than most. Constraints on land or constraints on resources, growing population means technology was always deployed for more efficient urban management. But this is no longer enough. And I think now the focus will shift on three distinct areas in addition to efficiency. First, sustainability, and I think in particular, critical resource efficiencies such as water or biodiversity. And in my view, the most important of all questions on how we deal with climate change. We should understand the carbon content or decarbonization impact of any decision we make in urban planning, design, and operations. Not with extrapolated data, but with real-world data and closed feedback loops across design, construction, and use. Secondly, the economic success related to technology will become ever more important. And I don't mean profitability of individual organizations. I mean, that is very important too. But what I mean is the core focus of any urban digital strategy on the creation of jobs, skills, and inward investment. Tech has proven again, even in this most challenging times, to be a fast-growing and resilient industry. And thirdly, and I think this is the most challenging area for many urban leaders, is the connection between well-being and inclusion and technology. People seek to be content. They prosper when one feels safe and supported with moments of lightness and fun. So how can data help with these? Or how do we manage the risk from a loss of privacy or ever-increasing pace enabled by ever more efficient systems? I think these are largely unanswered questions, and I think HDB's ability to constantly innovate and develop strategy is a real opportunity to lead the thinking and perhaps be as generous as before and share some of the insights with the rest of the world. I sometimes describe this as a triple helix, where public and private sector organizations need to be able to combine three strands of this helix: sustainability, inclusion, and data. All three have to be individually strong and well connected with each other so that the organizations and its customers can prosper. Now, we're living in quite unique circumstances. I would have loved to be with you guys right now and sit on a panel and hear the discussions and experience in person what it's like to think about the next 10 years of a HDB strategy. What a rich history, 60 years. And when we met in the past, it has always been the experience as much as the work that was for me very meaningful and deep. But we're experiencing something unique. And while we all hope that at some point we can live without the current enforced social restrictions to contain this virus, we are, however, experiencing also rapid and deep-rooted change in how we live and work in our cities. And I think these deep-rooted experiences will have a lasting impact in three urban systems that I'd like to go through briefly. I think first, the idea of a 15-minute neighborhood, very close to what Singapore is already practicing. Designed for active transport first, car use second. Vibrant communities that can combine life and work for all and all ages. And that idea that the community is now becoming a place of work again, and the neighborhood is becoming a place of work, is an important concept to understand. This will have a big impact on the second urban system, which is the central business district, high streets or business parks. I think they will shift away from low-value service activities or production-orientated activities and professional services and become more designed for creative interactions and experience. And those two, the 15-minute neighborhood and the new experience-driven central business district, means we need newer transport and technologies enabling connectivity between these two worlds. Now, this is not a foregone conclusion. Many talk about the death of offices, and others talk about the death of home working after we had, my dog usually runs in at this point and starts barking in the background while I'm trying to concentrate on you guys. But I think this is deeper, and I think we will see change. That's why we started a program called Beyond the Curve in Arab to gather more evidence for these hypotheses. Because I think if it is deep-rooted, and even if we only see a 40 to 60% shift of our time back into the 15-minute neighborhood, that will have significant impact on urban economies and infrastructure. It will be profound change that we need to be ready for when the enforced restrictions are over and we can choose how we live and how we work. And guess what? To make these decisions, to make those choices, we will need real-world data at scale. We will need to be creative in the use of it, and we need to make sure we have the right technologies available at our fingertips. So I'm looking forward to the panel discussion, and thank you very much for inviting me. I hope this was helpful, and yes, I'm looking forward to more.
Thank you very much, Volker. Those were very interesting remarks, and I'm sure colleagues or participants will pick up on some of them. So we've come to the section on Q&A, and we probably have about half an hour. And some questions have already come in, so I will attempt some curation and to pose the questions to one or more of the panel members as appropriate. So let me begin with a question that actually is probably appropriate for all members. And this is a question about how the pillars are linked. So we talk about live well, live smart, and live connected. And as you probably have already picked up, they don't stand alone as silos. They are interrelated. And indeed, you will have heard many cross-cutting themes across all three pillars. So the question that has come is about, the ways in which how these different ideas could be more effectively implemented and made to be mutually reinforcing for the good of the community. And also, how do we make these ideas work in a way that the community feels and is engaged in being part of these solutions? So it's in a sense a multi-barreled question, but it's really about interconnectedness across the pillars and the involvement of the community. Perhaps I could begin with Kun Hien, and then I'll take it in the order in which we've been introducing the speakers. If you could keep your responses fairly brief, we will have the opportunity then to address more questions. So over to you, Kun Hien.
Thank you, Lily, and thank you to all the other panelists. I think I've been busily taking notes, of all your suggestions to us. As to your question, Lily, I think that's precisely why it's so important for us to engage with the community when we carry out our plans, right? Because across the pillars of live well, live connected, live smart, who are they for? They're really for our residents and the people who live in our towns. So involving them in our plans is important to understand what they want. So when we talk about well-being and health, what exactly do they need? We need to ask them. And technology becomes an enabler for us to reach out to them. Because particularly in this COVID situation, we have to even reach out to them digitally, learn how to do that. And so that we can bring on board their inputs. And of course, with residents participating in the plans and in their suggestions, that is precisely what Live Connected is really about, involving the community, and they themselves are involving each other, having conversations, not just with us, but also with each other. So I think the process is truly cross-cutting across the three pillars that we're talking about. It's about the process bringing everything right across all three pillars. I'll stop there.
Thank you. So the interrelatedness, as we've heard, is very much anchored in the process as such. Perhaps, John, I wonder if you've got some reactions to this question.
Yeah, thanks, Lily. I think Kun Hien and HDB have really been leading the way in co-design. So I think co-design with agreeing what are going to be the outcomes, outcomes for the residents, and then outcomes for what HDB is trying to achieve. I think last mile closure is always one area that we have to constantly focus. And chances are that, like everything else, we probably have all solutions about 70 to 80% correct. And we need to have adaptive and learning loops with timely, meaningful feedback so that we can constantly iterate. I think I heard both David and Volker, David talking about being iterative and Volker talking about data. But I think that we need to make sure that whatever we design now, 10 years is still 10 years. It's going to evolve. And I think it's very important that we focus on that last mile closure and agree at the very start, at the co-design stage, what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve. Over.
Thank you for that, John. Last mile closure, feedback loops, all very important. David, over to you.
Okay, I'll be brief and think about an example. I think John talked about health span and lifespan, and basically the importance of trying to shorten the difference between your lifespan and your health span, right? So that you have your onset of your disease later, your chronic diseases. And the way to do that is, of course, to delay the onset is to ensure that our elderly are fit, are healthy, and so on. Now, so we want to ensure that the connectivity is likely designed in a way that as we age, into quite old age, we are still possibly wanting to take the opportunity and take the initiative to actually walk further and walk longer because of physical health is good for the health. But actually, we have a choice, right? We can say, well, I'm lazy, I'll just hang out with my people around below the void deck and so on. So how do you encourage the kind of exercises by walking further and so on? Now, if we think about walking further, very often we think it from a very pure economic perspective and say, let's make people connected and shorten the distance as much as possible, right? So that it's very walkable. Actually, the answer is no, because what is more walkable, whether your waiting time is terrible or your waiting time is okay, it's also psychological. Now, that's why if you have a good commuting experience and waiting experience at the MRT or at the bus stop, while you're waiting and you have interesting things to do and to look at, the waiting time is actually not that bad at all. Similarly, if I want the elderly people to walk further than they normally would, Well, what do? I ensure that the pathways is something that they really want to walk and they want to be motivated to walk, because they are walking along the way, they'll meet their friends, along their way they'll see nature, or they enjoy the bypass a mixed development whereby they can look at young kids and you can have intergeneration mixing and so on. Now, how do we do that at a huge level of thousands of residential units? Then the Locals Living Smart can come in, right? You can talk about apps, you can talk about visual analytics, making sure that you take care of privacy issues. And then with all this technology, you can actually predict these social interactions and influence the social interactions. And you can also test out hypotheses that, well, this is what I think as a designer. Well, we can check whether you are right or wrong. And over time, is that true for this group or that group? And when we think about elderly, but actually over time, today's 40s, right, is actually not the same as tomorrow's 40s and so on. And then we can actually track this over time, marrying your physical health purpose with your social interactions, with some social behavioral science knowledge and insights, as well as with the technology to be able to predict, and because we just can't do it in a conventional way.
Many thanks, David. I'll just turn very quickly to Volker for some crisp comments, because quite a number of other questions have come in.
I think when we talk about, or when I talk about data strategies, a critical part of it is knowledge, culture, and practices. So where Singapore and HDB are moving forward again around behavioral science and design thinking as sort of critical capabilities in the organization and in the society, that sets a foundation for technologists like myself to develop completely new ideas and concepts. So you need to be able to not just develop the data infrastructure and the data science and the technology, you also need to develop your knowledge, culture, and practice, and you need to see that as connected. And that usually comes through people, and that's why sort of the amazing nature of how open and willing people in Singapore want to work together is probably one of your biggest assets, as long as you keep then developing the underlying technical disciplines and encourage them to work in a multidisciplinary way.
Thank you very much indeed. So one of the issues or circumstances that's obviously occupying all of us is COVID. And quite a number of questions have come in around COVID, and I won't be able to ask every single one in the way in which they're presented. Let me attempt a summary. And I'd like to address the questions to Kun Hian and to David. The first is about, the impact of a pandemic like COVID on the design of HDB homes. And the second is for David, the impact of COVID on the design of community spaces and social spaces. Because if people can be closed down, then they might have existence value, but absolutely no use value.
Yes.
How can they be managed in ways that can allow people to still use them? So the first question first for Kun Hian about the design of homes, and then the second for David on the designs of community spaces.
Thank you. And I think it's a good question because this is on everybody's mind, right? We're living through it right now. First, I must say something about the way HDB towns are planned. Actually, with COVID-19, the world is looking towards more localization of facilities. Because when you have localization, it means you don't need to travel very far to get to the amenities that you want, which means you don't need to all crowd into public transport and all go to only one place to shop or into the city, for example. So the concept of localization become very important, and the concept of the neighborhood become very important. Now, fortuitously, my predecessors have done a fantastic job since 6 decades ago to start planning HDB towns as neighborhoods. And this backbone infrastructure has been very important. It's about the hierarchy of facilities, right? If you live in a HDB town, you're in a neighborhood, there will always be neighborhood shops, precinct shops, schools. Everything is actually quite nearby, which you can usually reach through walking or cycling. So that is very fundamental, to have facilities very close to you. And you have parks and playgrounds just below your block. So you don't need to go really very far. So that's important, the localization. Within the home, HDB flats come in several room sizes, right? It can be 2, 3 bedroom type. When we say 5-room, you will still have 3 bedrooms. So the thing is, we must allow people to be able to reconfigure their homes so that they can find a workspace. And especially if the children are also studying at home. So if we have different spaces within the home, you can actually get some privacy in different rooms. And in a way, it is already like that today. But of course, there is also discussion that sometimes it's just not conducive to work in a home. So in the future, maybe we should be thinking about how do we get some co-working spaces close by. If you can't work in the home, can I go downstairs or just walk 5 minutes to my neighborhood center or a community center where I can actually study in quiet or to do some work? So these are things we can think about going forward. Now, the third most important thing is to give you the digital infrastructure. If we did not have broadband and fiber brought to every home, including all HDB flats, it's impossible to work from home or to study from home. So fortunately, Singapore was ahead of the curve and had a digital infrastructure in place. This is going to improve further going forward because HDB will build smart enabled homes. Punggol North Shore will be the first smart precinct with this infrastructure built in. And with the smart enabled homes, you can bring on board a lot more digital infrastructure and applications. And I think that will facilitate working from home. But we must remember that the pandemic is hopefully not going to last forever. We would still need to go back to meeting people and going back to work and meeting friends in school as the children have gone back also. So it's about giving sufficient flexibility so that if a pandemic hits and we have a lockdown, we have a way of getting around it. But when the pandemic is better, I think quite a lot of people will still go back to work. Some will still work from home, and you have that option. And that's what we should strive for. So I just stop there, and I'd like to hear from David too. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Over to
Yeah.
you.
Well, my job is easy because I agree with everything that Tony has said about community. And I think just to elaborate maybe the point about localization, I think it's very important because we can think about not only COVID, right, but think about a disease X or disease X or Y, whereby we can have quite severe, even for a very short period where you have to isolate parts of Singapore. And in that situation, I think we really need to have the contingencies. It could be just 3 days, but the contingencies that we make sure that 3 days our people who are being isolated in some sense. Of course, isolated doesn't mean you stay totally at home. You still need to go out, get your food. Maybe you can still go out and look after check on your elderly parents and so on. So we probably have to think about a scenario planning plus, right? Have to think about those scenarios when we say localize and isolate. What are the different scales and how does that correspond to our amenities in terms of both at the neighborhood level and the precinct level? And very importantly, because then in those situations, right, we probably cannot send many people and put them into the trains, but you can still cycle, you can still walk and so on. And so the different mode of transport in terms of the amenities, in terms of the urgency of the amenities that you need to function in a very reasonable way, probably got to be tied up in a very holistic manner. And I think the good thing is that the HDB towns are planned in such a way where these are already sort of taken into considerations in terms of your community and so on. And a quick note about community and contributions that I talk about. I suppose another thing to think through a bit ambitiously, I don't really have a good answer for this, is that we don't have poor neighborhoods, right, in Singapore in a way that you have it in, say, New York or elsewhere. But we do have some blocks of precincts where they are quite old, where they are elderly people. Maybe there are a little bit more singles, elderly people staying and so on. Could we ensure that in times of partial lockdowns, that when you go about doing your usual things, you ensure that there is still a lot of looking out for each other neighborliness that is possible. So when I walk down as a single guy, I could look at another person who is maybe elderly or some young kids that need help, and I can just spend some time with the person. It's right at the same element of co-spaces. So you let these naturalistic intergeneration and diverse groups interact together through your design and planning. I think it is quite important. But I do agree with Kun Hien's, and that's my last point, that you also cannot design our townships in a wartime COVID situation, right? You have to design it such that it's flexible for both peacetime, so to speak, and also a COVID, a wartime as you combat the crisis.
Thank you, David. That reference to the elderly segment of our population draws me to a question that's been directed, or which I will direct to Volker. And this is about how smart technologies and initiatives are to be made socially inclusive so that they're beneficial for all, and particularly for the elderly who may not know how to embrace smart technologies easily.
I think people wrote some time ago about an aging population, and then people started to talk about phones with bigger buttons, you know, to sort of solve the technical access issue or give people more apps or introduce smartphones to them. I don't think that has been very successful. Most technical changes are driven because the user agrees to why they should use it. And I think that same principle applies to an aging population. I think the thought should be spent on why somebody in an age group between, I don't know, 60, 70, 80 would want to use technology. You know, what would make their life better? For some, it might be access to health, it might be longer extending life in the home environment, and for others, it will be social connectivity and reaching families and friends more frequently. So by going through needs and understanding why somebody would use technology, I think we can also do a lot more for all generations. And we should not assume because somebody past a certain date of birth, they are not interested or not capable to deal with technology, but it needs to be relevant to them.
Thank you very much indeed. It's very important, I think, that as we embark on or continue on our smart nation, smart city initiatives, that we try as best as we can not to leave any particular segment of the population behind. There is a question which I'd like to pose to John, and I'd be very interested to hear your response. It's really about, you know, passive and active features in our built environment that can nudge us to be healthier and more active. And before you respond to that, I'd just like to link it to another set of questions around nature in the city, because I imagine that some of that might be part of the active or passive features that can encourage us to live more healthy lives. So your comments about active and passive features and how nature features in that. Over to you, John.
Okay, thanks, Lily. So let me start off with the first part. How can we design structures to encourage and nudge people to exercise? I think one of the best examples is the staircase. You know, I've been in buildings where the first thing that strikes me is a beautifully designed staircase right as soon as I step in. And that staircase can easily take me several floors up. And the staircase is wide and there's artwork and it looks very inviting. And the chances of me using that staircase to go up, especially if my destination is like 2 or 3 stories up, the chances of me using that staircase are extremely high. If I walk in and the first thing I see is a whole bank of elevators and I can't find the staircase is actually an emergency staircase tucked away at the side, chances are I may end up using the elevator. So I think that these are ways in which one can use, and again, I think there's several esteemed architects here on the panel and you know, in the audience. I think it's how do you draw your eye to where you want the person to focus on, and then how do you make it inviting and fun. And I've seen this. In you know in the Netherlands, and I got very excited when I saw it there. I've seen this in the United Kingdom, and I'm seeing this in buildings in Singapore. And so I think that that's one way to sort of nudge people. In terms of greenery, I think there's several studies. I know one study done from colleagues in Hong Kong, where they looked at the greenery. In terms of streets which have more greenery, chances, especially if it's safe and the ambient temperature is not too bad, places with more greenery, people tend to walk more along those streets than if without greenery. So I think there is data that you can nudge people's behavior into exercise with both design as well as with flora. Over.
Thank you, John. So there is a question here about if we're to live connected, we need to think particularly about certain kinds of social relations. The intergenerational is one. How do we facilitate that and encourage that? And also, quite as importantly, the cross-social class interactions. And how might Hdb Living be able to encourage and facilitate these kinds of particular social interactions? I'd like to pose that question to David.
Thanks, Lily. I wish I could pose that question back to you because you are the expert, right? The answer is hawker centers, isn't it? For those who are not aware, Lily is an expert looking at it, the science of hawker centers, which is really quite a very holistic science in it, because it is one of the best things that Singapore actually has done, because it is a place where not only you have good food, it is structured in a way that is clean, that has a variety, and it actually brings people of all sorts together, right? Not only people of different classes, people of different ethnicity, people of different orientation in terms of your lifestyles, and also foreigners, PRs, non-residents, foreigners and Singaporeans and so on. And when you are there, when you are eating that common thing, many of your differences just go away. Right now, of course, I'm not just talking about hawker centers alone. And I think the challenge then is to be able to look at our different groups, our different segments. What are the commonalities that we can bond them together? And all of us are humans. It doesn't matter you are PR locals or Singaporean, Chinese, Malay, Indian, or any other races that you can name. You are human. And as humans, we have many, many commonalities. Can we then activate those social identities, those interests, those mindsets? And what are the way of design principles or the amenities that can bring these people together so that we get bonded? Having said that, we will still have genuine differences. Then can we look at the differences and look at how they can complement each other? Right? A Chinese guy may love to eat the Indian rojak, for example. That's a very simplistic example to show you that we might be different, but your differences sometimes need not be antagonistic. So the commonalities and the complementarities, I think, are the basic principles that we can create the bonds together. And then I think HDB, if I may end with this acronym, right? H will be for health, whether it is physical, social, mental, and so on. D is for your design. And you design it through the 3 pillars that you talk about. And ultimately, B is your bonds. It is all about bonding with the nature, bonding with the people, right? So health, design, bonds. So I'm done with HDB, right?
Well done, David. If I might turn to Volker next, there is a question here about, what 2 or 3 key emerging disruptive technologies or trends do you think will have the greatest potential to impact the ways in which we design and plan our homes and our towns?
I get asked this all the time. This is, and then people want me to talk about quantum computing and blockchain technology and the next flying sourcing thing that comes around. My answer is really focused on the built environment. So I think quantum computing or blockchain has its place, and blockchain we'll see in financial services causing all sorts of disruption. But in the environment that we operate in, the built world, I still think we have a lot more to do with combining the Internet of Things, cloud technologies, and a whole range of data sciences, not just machine learning. And being able to master those 3 in an integrated fashion is a key technology capability or key technology trends that organizations still need to master in the built world. The second is related to data sharing. So currently the cost of advanced insights, about 60 to 70% is transformation of data, cleansing, acquisition, highly unproductive tasks. And with cities being highly connected urban systems, sharing is actually a key trend that needs to have its explicit strategy and approach. And the third is not the technologies, it is actually innovation management, knowledge, culture, and practices that allow technologists to work with the user, or those in the industry of work. So that would be my three trends I would put forward.
Wonderful, Volker. I particularly like your last one, that actually at bottom it's about us as human beings. So we're just at about 4:42, and I've allowed this to run a little bit longer than scheduled because the questions have been so interesting, and still more so the answers. Let me conclude with one last question to everyone, and I'm going to pose this to everyone, but I have to urge you to keep your answers really succinct. DPM talked about the spirit of Singapore together. And in the spirit of Singapore together, I'd like to ask, what is the one key area where HDB and our residents could work together to ensure that the strategies, plans, and programs that were discussed earlier can really take off to create better homes for all? I'm going to begin with Kun Hien.
Hey, thank you, Lily. Here I have a lot of wish lists for my residents, but I think the most important is please give us your feedback on the Designing for Life roadmap. That's important. And after giving your suggestions and feedback, we want to work with you to shape the environment. So do volunteer your time, and we hope that you will participate when we come to you and ask you to be in a focus group or to work with your neighbors to do some really great ground up activity, which we would like to support you with. So do participate, and we really look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you. John, would you like to comment on this?
Well, I think it's that spirit of Singapore and SG United, that no one should be left behind and no group should be left behind. So whatever we co-create, we should do this with everyone in mind and ultimately ensure that that happens.
Thank you. David?
Yes, I think we are almost all aligned. I agree with John and with Kun Hien that feedback and inclusivity is important. And I would add to that how could we then use smart technologies to improve the speed and the quality and the comprehensiveness in which we obtain this feedback, accurately access them, and then to be able to close the loop. And one way is to use artificial intelligence to be able to sieve out the similarities in terms of emotional analysis and so on, so that we can categorize these feedback quickly, able to get back to them. And I think we should ask people not only what you want, what do you think others want? I think that is very important because not everybody will be proactive to give you the voice or have a chance to articulate. So asking people, what do you want and what do you think others want, I think will be important. Of course, you need to validate that against trying to reach out to those others that others claim that you want.
Thank you. And I turn to Volker to have the last word on this.
I think your early commitment to neighborhoods and then your commitment to connectivity and broadband and smart technologies has stood you very well going into COVID, if I call it that. But how we come out and when we come out, cities will feel different and experiences will be different. And having a really clear strategy on how you would like technology to perform in that new future, I think is quite an important question to address now, because we might have 12, 18 months to be ready. And then the second is, for me, sharing of data is really becoming a big challenge in many cities around the world. And because of your collaborative culture and your willingness to involve everybody, I think you could set standards for yourselves and for others in this area.
Thank you, Volker. So, to the audience, I'm certain that you will agree with me that it's been a very interesting couple of hours where we've heard the Designing for Life roadmap, we've heard the ambitions and the vision, and also heard from the panelists the different dimensions in a little bit more depth, whether it's in living in connected ways, living well, or living smart. The final comments from the panelists, I think, have been spot on. How are we to make this work? We need to be participatory. We need to have your involvement with feedback, with your time as volunteers. We need to do things together. And we need to leverage technology to help us to do all of this better. I think one of the things that comes through is that we are able to do this, I think, with confidence moving ahead because of the past efforts of having already built neighborhoods, already thought through, issues like how to set up precincts, what is a human scale that is encouraging of social and human interaction, but also past efforts in building cyber connectivity, as Kun Hien and Volker both point out, if we are to enable community and well-being through technology, all that couldn't have happened without the earlier work that was done in building the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure. So at the end of the day, it boils down, I think, to us as individuals in being willing to participate in the roadmap, in contributing our ideas to the roadmap, and in participating in the various initiatives that are outlined. So on that note, I would like very much to thank the panelists for their deep insights and to thank the audience for having participated very actively through the Q&A channel, even though we're not together in person. With that, I'd like to hand over to Violet, our MC for the afternoon, to close off the event. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Professor Lily Kong, Dr. Cheong Koon Hien, Professor John Wong, Professor David Chan, and Mr. Volker Buscher for sharing your valuable views on the significance of HDB's new direction. We would also like to thank everyone who has joined us for today's launch of HDB's Designing for Life roadmap. To find out more about the various initiatives under the refreshed roadmap, do visit our online exhibition at designingforlife.gov.sg. The QR code is available here. The online exhibition will feature some of our roadmap-inspired initiatives in park residences at Tengah. Do also share your views and ideas on the future of HDB living with us. We would love to hear from you. We have now come to the end of today's webinar. Have a pleasant evening ahead. Stay safe and keep well.